this is your first time visiting us locally or on the webinar, you're most welcome. We're going to start this morning's experience with what we are calling Let's Talk. And that will be followed by a meditation, and then that will be followed by the Sunday talk. So there is a question this morning, and let me read the question. During these times, and this is from one of the webinar attendees, during these times of great separatism, then it is true to keep striving toward unity? Please elaborate. So we have a couple of ideas here. One is that this person believes that we're in times of great separatism and is talking about striving toward unity. Is it important to strive toward unity? So to me, that because words are important, ideas are important, and differences of opinion are also important. So you take the idea of separatism and the principle of unity, and we need to understand what each means. And I would guarantee you that almost any one of us that answers this question of what's separatism and what's unity will answer it differently. So let me start with this, and then let's see if anybody else wants to add to it. When I was growing up, my goal in life was to be a professional violinist, and I had this dream of, as a woman, to have this elaborate dress that was going to be beautiful, and even though it had to be black, because professional violinists in a symphony orchestra, everybody wore black. But I was going to have sequins on my black dress and chiffon, and it was going to be so beautiful. So it was one of the images I had of what it was going to be like to be a professional violinist. But that's not the point. The point is this, that we had, let's say, 101 members of the symphony. The majority usually ran from 101 to 107 members with each professional symphony. That meant a symphony made of different instruments, a symphony of musicians that were playing different parts from a composition written by typically, a great composer, a great musician. And typically the whole orchestra, the whole symphony was conducted by a magnificent conductor, one that had a lot of experience and knew all the different parts that all the musicians would be playing. When we followed the conductor, there was a uniformity in the music that produced a harmony that was otherworldly. Even though the violins were playing different notes than the violas, than the cellos, than the flutes, than the bass drum, and so on and so forth, we were all playing different notes, and yet it was orchestrated in such a way, and there was such a rhythm and such a sense of unity among the performers, that the result was this unifying beauty that gave us all a sense of freedom. We had a conductor that we were following, and that was always a question. What would happen if there was no conductor? Would the musicians all still play together? Well, the answer was this: yes, for a while. But after a while, we're going to start having different interpretations. This musician wants to play the piece or that composition this way. That musician is going to want to interpret it a little bit different. The timing will be different, the rhythm, and pretty soon you have 101 or 107 incredibly proficient musicians playing through disunity. Interesting. So you need a conductor. Typically, you need a conductor to keep us all together. Now, here's another story. I'll never forget this, when I was in high school, playing in a high school orchestra, we had this young kid. He played a violin for country music. He was not a classically trained violinist. So here the rest of us, we all, joined together and tuned our instruments to concert A, and we were all, just because we were high school perfectionists, we were already professionals, we were great. And so we were doing everything perfectly. Well, in comes this country violinist. He comes in, he sits down, he makes the most obnoxious sound you can ever hear. That's, what my memory ears back then recalled. But it was so impacting because he was so different than the rest of us. What happened is he created chaos. So even though he loved his violin and he loved country music, he brought in chaos, and that chaos created separatism and argumentation, and it took time and energy away from our rehearsals and so forth. So that's the idea of what separatism can be. A person can take the same piece of music, but if they're not in tune with, in rhythm with, in sync with, or in, let's say, synthesis with the music and the composer and the rest of the musicians, then there's going to be separatism. And then finally, unity. Oftentimes people think unity means that you are being used like a puppet, that you're not independent, that unity is a lack of freedom. So you see, these are different ideas to consider when we look at the term separatism and unity. To me, it all comes from the heart. If a person functions through the nature of love, the nature of compassion, the nature of light, and will, there's going to ultimately be this sense of freedom through unity. If instead we function through our opinions and our bias and our mental mechanism only, we're going to be so materialistic that we have no sense of future, no sense of harmony, no sense of rhythm, and only separatism, aka chaos. So that's my answer to, this question. And again, the question was, during these times of great separatism, then it is true to keep striving toward unity. So you see, hopefully this answer opens up some ideas. So is there anyone online or here locally that would like to tell us more about separatism, tell us more about unity? What does it mean to you? I know it's not easy to come up with something so spontaneous, but this is, what I shared with you this morning. Think about it and put it into your own life about the difference between, in your own family life. Do you see separatism versus unity, and what's the cause, and how do you bring the family together in a unified way and yet stay independent in your thinking and beliefs. Okay, so thank you for the question. I did have something I was going to talk about, but maybe next week. I participated yesterday in this London-based online conference of Agni Yoga students. We were all, from different parts of the world. And this fellow, who is a counselor and he works at a university in London, was talking about service. And he said, what he loves so much about service is the joy of sharing. That just really impacted me, that service is the joy of serving. Service is the joy of serving. So I was going to talk a little bit about that, but we're out of time. So maybe next Sunday, if no one has a particular question. Actually, I'm not going to be here. Where am I going to be? I'm going to be in New York for a couple of weeks, and then we'll come back. So when I come back, we'll return to the Let's Talk experience, and by that time, maybe we'll have some ideas to share about service and joy of serving. So this morning, I'm talking about a most interesting subject. One which, despite its ugliness, is an element of life that we all know exists. And the subject is the army of darkness, which really aligns with the webinar question from this morning about the importance of striving toward unity, and also the question about separatism. Because the army of darkness is all about separatism. So we're going to learn more about the specifics of that. A great sage said, yesterday Urasvati saw the dark ones and their flags. I'm going to repeat this. Yesterday, Urasvati, who is Helena Rourke, this was her spiritual name. Yesterday, Urasvati saw the dark ones and their flags. So what did the great sage mean about the flags of the dark ones? But I think it's important to also think this way before I answer that question, that those of us that are sensitive to light and darkness in the world relate and understand, this element of life called darkness. Some people refuse to acknowledge it, and they believe that, to cite a phrase from Agni Yoga, that the teaching and that life should be all about sugar-coated nuts, or honey-coated nuts. Well, if that's what you believe, then you're going to be sorely disappointed. At some point in your life, you're not going to understand certain events that are occurring in your life or that are occurring in life in general. But those who live in the world today and are sensitive to the army of light and sensitive to the army of darkness, aware that this is part of life. It's part of our educational and learning experience. Okay, so again the question. So what did the great sage mean about the flags of the dark ones? Certain dark ones have names. Names which, if you really think about it, is not going to surprise you. For example, each named dark one is a group. Each named dark one is a group. So, for example, a group exists which is called hatred. So hatred is a group that forms part of the army of darkness. Another is fear. Then we have anger and jealousy and revenge and malice and slander and even greed. You know, there are others, of course, but if we can just recognize these terms and the expression of these groups, and they are groups because there are groups that make up hatred, hate groups, and so forth, that you begin to recognize, okay, there is a group that is being used by the army of darkness. Self-righteousness is another group. Ingratitude is another group. Deception is another group. One grouping of dark ones that I found listed in the teaching, and to me it was pretty unusual until I understood what it meant, and it's a part of the dark army called rubbish collectors. Isn't this interesting? Rubbish collectors. For example, such an individual will go from person to person collecting their weaknesses. It's just like they have this notebook with them. It's a mental notebook, and they're writing down, okay, here's so-and-so, and this is their weakness, and they put it in their mind. They've had sicknesses, illnesses, and they add that to the list. This is some of the mistakes I've learned about this person. I'm going to put this on the list, the mistakes they've made, their failures. And they collect this rubbish and they use it, this information, in the future. Such a person uses this rubbish like capital in their life. It gives them a sense of self-importance. See, they've collected all this rubbish from individuals, and now they're going to use it as a form of self-empowerment, I guess we could call it. So they think it empowers them and gives them an identity and makes them feel important. The person collects rubbish and then distributes it here and there, creating problems for the people that they are talking about. Such a person will act as your friend. They will learn about your secrets. Or they will do things for you to make you indebted to them. And then they tell everyone what they did for you, and they tell others, look what I did for so-and-so, because they have a weakness, they have a failure, and I'm going to help them. And up until that time, no one knew about that individual's weakness. No one knew about that individual's failure, but now they do. That is what it means to be a rubbish collector. And rubbish collectors are part of the army of darkness, a group that form part of the army of darkness. Another one I mentioned was ingratitude. It is a condition in which a person does not feel grateful to his parents, spouse, teacher, friends, and so on. But we must even feel gratitude for the simplest of things, the simplest of vegetables that we eat. We need to give gratitude for the clean air and sunshine. How many of us, when we were children, ever thought about being grateful for clean air? And now this is all we think about. We move to places that has clean air and sunshine. So we need to give gratitude for the clean air and sunshine that we have today. Early in the morning, look to the sun and say, "You are so beautiful." Are we so old that we no longer have the joy of gratitude? Ingratitude is inspired by an army of the dark ones. Isn't that interesting to think about? All of these dark ones collect together and form groupings. We become so used to experiencing such people, such events, we lose sight of the fact that they in fact represent the dark side of life, the army of darkness. Now here's a quote. "Dark forces are busy confusing people, even encouraging good people to form groupings that deepen the cause of separativeness and superiority." The disciples of the world must be careful that unified groups, churches, and other organizations are not controlled by a totalitarian board or president. I'm going to repeat the first part of this because it requires thought and recognition and experience and observation to see these events take place. Again, from the quote, "Dark forces are busy confusing people, even encouraging good people to form groupings that deepen the cause of separativeness and superiority." We see this in any field. It seems to be particularly dominant in spiritual communities. Whether it's a religious community or an esoteric spiritual community, good people create an organism or an organization. And if they have the wrong leadership, what happens is that the members of that group begin to think that they are superior and their knowledge is superior to the rest of the world. See how that works? Separatism. So you can take something as beautiful as the ageless wisdom teaching and form a grouping around the ageless wisdom to study and enjoy and to love and to practice and to become. And without knowing it, this is how the dark forces keep themselves busy. Such a grouping that started off with the most beautiful intention and the most beautiful motivation begins to see themselves as exclusive to everyone and everything else. See how that works? The evolution from mass to individual consciousness and then from individual to group consciousness is very difficult. From mass consciousness to individual and from individual to group consciousness is very difficult. The dark forces use every method to manipulate any group work by introducing the elements of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and despotism into it. Some dark forces wait many years watching any group that is organizing itself year after year and rendering better service. When this organization reaches a stage where it can be used profitably, the dark forces begin through very subtle means to introduce authoritarianism elements within the group. They also stimulate the egos and vanities of certain members to such a degree that these individuals take steps to control the whole organization, serving what? Who? They're serving the intentions of the dark forces. So this can happen on a very small scale, or a national scale, or an international scale. It doesn't make any difference. It just depends on the light and the love and the power centralized within that particular group, and its influence upon its surroundings that the forces of darkness are going to observe and watch and perhaps ultimately manipulate. So leaders must be very sensitive and alert to these elements and take quick and sharp action to isolate the problem and protect the group. Sensitive leaders see these signs in the behavior of members. They must also see the approach of traitors and schemers and so forth. You can see how a true democracy is attacked in millions of ways from both outside and inside to curb it for the benefit of separative interests. The great teacher states that the dark brothers are far more advanced in their externalization than is the spiritual hierarchy. To help the hierarchy externalize, our hierarchy, this planetary hierarchy, the spiritual hierarchy externalize, disciples of the world must increase and try to help humanity enter the path leading to light and love and beauty. Light and love and beauty. This is a hard labor, a labor that must be carried on day and night. The Dark Lodge externalizes through those who have no heart, and those who are greedy, and those eager to exploit and deceive and manipulate people for their pleasures. They also externalize through those who are ugly and are engaged in destroying the morality and the sanity of people, and those who are lazy and occupied with their own pleasures and comfort. And because the numbers of these agents are in the billions, the numbers of these agents of the dark forces number in the billions, the Dark Lodge has greater facility to externalize. The disciples' work is difficult. They must fight on 3 fronts. The first front is they must fight against the lethargy and ignorance of people. They must fight against the lethargy and ignorance of people. Number 2, they must fight against the stupidities of those on the path. We could take these 2, and the third one is they must fight against the dark forces and have a seminar on each one of these. And what does it mean to disciples must fight against the stupidities of those on the path? I wish I had time this morning to talk about it because I'm very impassionate about it. What it means and how to fight against it. The more disciples we have, the more light is going to penetrate into the world. And the greater the chance will be for the hierarchy to manifest. See, even that in itself, that phrase, the more disciples we have, the more light will penetrate into the world. That in itself, you can write a book about the significance of what this means. What does it mean to have more light penetrate into the world? So you can't just say, oh yeah, more light's going to penetrate into the world. What the heck does that mean? What does it mean to have more light penetrate into the world? We need to know how to understand these things, see, and to labor for it to happen. The game the dark forces play is to flatter us and to make us feel so important that we begin to disregard our elders, our parents. This is what's happening with our kids today. And I'm speaking in generalities, of course, not specifics. But it is happening. We begin to disregard our elders. Our elders, put them in a nursing home. You know, we have wonderful nursing homes in Prescott. Once you get in this nursing home, you never hear from them again. They're dead to the rest of the world. That's stupid. See what I'm saying? Flattery makes us feel so important that we begin to disregard our elders, our parents, our teachers, and develop a rebellious spirit against them. After they detach us from our source, after these games that the dark forces play, after they detach us from our source of spirituality or moral nourishment, our teacher, our teachings, being able to live the life of light and love and power, they lead us into ingratitude in so many ways. They lead us into disrespect in so many ways. Now, sometimes your soul tries to warn you and to bring you back to your spiritual foundation. And then you feel that it is too late to turn back. That's the dark forces. The dark forces try to divert you from any person who could possibly help you find the right path in the future. They especially target your spiritual teachers. And do not lose any opportunity to turn you off from these teachers by fabricating stories or by pointing out their personality weaknesses in them. They even compare your teachers to or with world teachers just to minimize their value in your consciousness. They also use the same kind of technique to attack any book that may be the source of inspiration to you. And so what do you have to do? If you have the courage, you take that book and you put it underneath your bed, or you hide it in the darkest place in your closet so they can't take it away from you. Or you just say, oh, I shouldn't be reading this, should I? and you take it to the used bookstore, you see. When successful, they attack your value structures and slowly turn you away from any value that in the future would help you free yourself from the slavery of the dark forces. So to protect yourself from such attacks, you must not allow your friends or enemies to attack anyone whom you love and trust and respect. Sometimes dark forces use or choose your friends rather than an enemy for this task, so that they trap you through your friends. It is sometimes better to cut off a conversation before it goes on, because no matter how strong you are, it can sow certain seeds that make it, listen to this, make it easier for the dark forces to regroup in the future and attack again. That's why I said I wish I had more time to go into the depth of what some of these comments I'm making mean. I said sometimes it's better to cut off such a conversation where you hear someone belittling your teacher, showing disregard, showing disrespect, saying, look at the weakness. Look at that. Walk away from it, because they're, according to what I've seen, what I have a knowledge about, what I know so well in the teaching, is that seeds are being planted during those conversations that make it easier for the dark forces to regroup in the future and attack again. This life or another, the next incarnation. Remember that those whom you love and trust and respect are the energy sources of your life. If you desert them, if you desert these energy sources of your life, you're going to be in the hands of the enemy. And it's your vanity and ego that makes this happen. Such attacks are carried out by dark forces through gossip, especially, and then using your friends or close associates. But sometimes these attacks are carried out in the form of influences, or even through a direct voice that you hear in your head. I know a handful of beautiful people who have heard a voice in their head that said, leave your family. In the name of Christ, leave your family and go out and serve in the world. And they walk out of their family, leave their children, leave their spouse, leave all of their responsibilities, and walk out into the world and die. Because they're not ready, they're not prepared, they do not have the resources. Because they heard that voice in their head. The ways of the army of darkness are many, so you need to recognize them in their various aspects, so you are not unknowingly caught in that web. People must come to realize that essentially every human being stands for beauty and goodness and joy and freedom and striving and service. Every human being in his essence knows that it is for their own good and for the good of the whole if they live a harmless and progressively beneficial life. But they are often influenced, like it or not, they are often influenced by forces, entities, and dark agents who mislead them and make them act against their own best interests and the best interests of the whole. I just can't, it's so difficult. It's this download of experiences and the knowledge and the observation I've had over my many years of life, that I've seen these things happen right in front of me. And people that have been thrown off the path because of it. And I can't bring them back. So don't get yourself in that position. Don't let your ego and vanity throw you off your spiritual quest. How did these dark agents come into being if the essence of a human being is essentially good? This is a very good question to ask and to think about. It's a topic of discussion found in many books, but essentially we can say that evil is the disfiguration of the image in which you are created. It's the disfiguration of the image in which you were created. Disfiguration occurs as a result of separatism, stupidity, selfishness, and greed. Separatism, stupidity, selfishness, and greed. In the history of our solar system, a moment came when certain beings stood against the will of the solar logos and then gradually acted against his will. They formed their own hierarchy and developed their own plan. Throughout millions of ages, they became a scientifically organized army, acting against those who were in line with the divine will and eager to travel toward the source. The army of these rebels that some call today the retrogressive forces, constitutes and orchestrates all the phenomena of obsession and possession. The army of these retrogressive forces constitute and orchestrate all the phenomena of obsession and possession. So if you have been told that you are possessed, put your trust in the one that sees that possessor so you're not thrown off your spiritual quest. Every time you do something against the law of love and against your conscience, you are acting at that moment under the control of the dark agent. That is why Christ once said that we must not judge, because we do not know that the one whom we judge is a victim of an evil force acting through or behind him. Spiritual development is not and must not be easy, but once you enter the current of spiritual progress, then it is very easy. The difficulty is within us. The difficulty is within us. We create the difficulty. For example, we try not to gossip, and then what happens? We gossip. Things will be very difficult for us, but if we go with the current of spiritual progress, then there will not be any difficulty, or very little difficulty. The army of darkness will try to lead people into indifference, where they slowly motivate in you an uninterested and indifferent attitude toward the ugliness and corruption going on in your environment, or even a disinterest in beauty and joy and freedom. Or if one of your friends is engaged in difficulties, you show indifference. And this is what the army of darkness does. They use calculated methods to weaken and to obsess you. They lead you into drugs and marijuana and alcohol. They cultivate in you a spark of cheap comedy and flattery. They make you tell belittling jokes about things that are sacred to you and to others. They make you ridicule those who are sincerely trying to improve their lives. They create chaos in the lives of people and prevent them from proceeding on the path of perfection. According to many records, a disciple is attacked. Listen to this. A disciple is attacked before the expansion of their work, and I can attest to this. A disciple is attacked before the expansion of their work, especially during the beginning of their work or the beginning of a new project. Whenever a great opportunity is on the way, an attack reaches them to frustrate them, to create fear in them, or to cause them to make wrong decisions. So let me wrap up with this by listing some of the more innumerable forms of attack that these groupings and these agents and members of the army of darkness, how they form an attack. They start by making you have an accident. Isn't that interesting? By making you have an accident. Even causing you physical pain. They can cause an overstimulation of your lower centers. They can cause attacks on the life and consciousness thread when you are in your mom's womb, before you're born. They can cause attacks on your life. They can cause you to have fatigue that leads to inertia. They can make you indifferent towards your best friends. Even the appearances of insects and spiders who will mysteriously attack you. I bet you didn't know some of these things. And attacks on those whom you love the most, which you can do nothing to prevent. The army of dark forces force you to do things that you would never have imagined doing. They make you work against those who would help you in the future, as I said earlier. So where these are generalizations, some of you will be able to use these points as a basis for guidance. All of these and more sophisticated attacks can be handled that's the key, handled by invoking the Christ and his love. Also by using pure willpower as a laser ray to scorch the attack. Also, if you're a disciple, you can stand in the visualization of a 5-pointed star. You can chant the great invocation 21 times or repeat it more often if needed. You can also use the sword of your master. Or, if you know how to do this, you can invoke the lightning of the Ancient of Days. And finally, psychic energy is a very powerful shield within our aura. So this is definitely not a feel-good, huggy, touchy talk. But these things need to be understood, particularly in the day and times that we are living right now.